The most unexpected thing that the Walt Disney Company is dealing with right now is the fact that their once trusted critics that supported all of their ideology, all of their agendas being shoehorned into the many brands before in the past, are now actually taking action against Disney by showing them poor reviews, by actually telling it like it is when it comes to Snow White, and this is really beginning to backfire on those like Bob Iger, those like Rachel Zegler, and everyone else involved when it came to the creatives behind this movie like Mark Webb, the director, and writer Greta Gerwig. It is all beginning to come crashing down. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. Now, one major aspect of Snow White right now that is just not resonating even with Disney fans, and that's a major shocker, is the fact that it's just a flat-out bad movie. All agendas aside, let's not even talk about agendas here for a second. Focusing on the movie in isolation, it is just a very poor movie when it comes to the pacing, the acting, the writing, the producing, the directing. Across the board, it is just failure after failure. Now, focusing on Bob Iger and one major swift move that he recently made in a recent emergency meeting between himself, the board of directors, the executives, etc., really has a lot to do with the whole firing situation across the board as well. Let's get into this, shall we? Now, interestingly enough, we know that Bob Iger is trying to do whatever he can to prop himself up as a CEO, to kind of make himself seem like a better CEO than what he really is, before he plans to step down by 2026. That is still his plan, that is still his end game, is that he wants to call it quits by next year. A new CEO will take over to take control of the Walt Disney Company and steer it in a different path, either for better or worse, who knows. We'll have to wait and see. But interestingly enough, with the Walt Disney Company dealing with endless backlash over their Snow White film for multiple reasons, one major development going on now involves more to do with the Walt Disney Company taking serious action against the entire team that handled Disney's Snow White, and how this is yet another form of scapegoating coming from Bob Iger himself and the many executives and board of directors at the Disney Company. A crucial update to this situation now involves how Bob Iger recently made a swift move that was all sudden by deciding to fire the entire marketing team that handled Disney's Snow White, which was best described as the very team that was responsible for supervising the many trailers and TV spots that were created for the film. Once those failed, and once the poor reviews came in from the trusted critics on Disney's part, Bob Iger made the move by ridding of this very involved marketing team that put together a supervised list of TV spots and trailers, and how Disney will no longer be using them essentially for upcoming Marvel films or any other Disney live-action remake. Now, to make matters worse for the Snow White drama, both Greta Gerwig and the writer of Snow White and director Mark Webb have also been let go from the Walt Disney Company as a whole. It turns out that Greta Gerwig was just about to land a major writing gig for an upcoming Marvel film centered on the X-Men. Now, this contract deal that was nearing completion was recently called off by Bob Iger and the Disney execs, as they will no longer be using Greta for any Disney projects down the road or moving forward. In addition to that, Mark Webb was also supposed to actually be one of the co-writers for an upcoming Marvel project for the film industry, of course, for the movie theaters, for a major film that was, of course, going to handle the scenes for Andrew Garfield's version of Spider-Man that is set to return in the MCU. Now, his involvement there was also called off after his monumental failure with Snow White and his directing style that just didn't work well with both test screeners and the once trusted critics. Now, guys, before I move on, let me just say one thing about the whole marketing team aspect and how Bob Iger wants nothing to do with the marketing team that handles Snow White. This brings us way back to the summer of 2024, the marketing team that handled the Acolyte series, and how they too were let go after basically that series failed miserably and it just was not resonating with Star Wars fans or even newcomers alike. And it's literally the same copy and paste action by Bob Iger and how they handled the Acolyte series, and how that kind of action is now carrying over to Snow White. Now, the fact that they let go of Greta Gerwig, they let go of Mark Webb for both upcoming Marvel projects, it really goes to show you how they have lost all faith in these two. They want nothing to do with Greta Gerwig, they want nothing to do with Mark Webb. because they know exactly how the audience, how the general public is going to react once you hear those two names attached to any Marvel project down the road, the very individuals that handled Snow White, right? So that's one thing to actually, let that sink in for a moment. The fact that they are going through this motion in a very similar pattern to what happened with the Acolyte series, it really just goes to show you how far Bob Iger is willing to go to really save his image, or whatever image is left. However, it gets even worse than that, since Bob Iger and the board also made a last-minute decision to fire and rid the many artists and animators as well that were involved for Snow White. Now, this comes in the midst also of how Bob Iger is still doubling down on his cost containment plan to reduce the amount of funds going into unnecessary areas of production in his mind. Now, the Snow White firings are also only the beginning of the Walt Disney Company taking action, as Disney is now seriously considering bringing a halt or putting a hold to other live-action projects that were going to double down on DEI. These included Sword in the Stone, Hercules, and bringing back a new version of Alice in Wonderland in a very diverse way. Now, the board is already heavily divided about this call by Bob Iger and the board members that support Iger. This is all rooted and coming from the disaster that is Snow White. This all comes weeks after Rachel Zegler was fired from several Disney projects, as they, of course, fired her as actually viewed her as a high-risk actress after, of course, the whole drama that led to the firing of that overall contract deal that she was supposed to land. So, to recap, she was supposed to be in Pirates of the Caribbean remake. She was supposed to do some voiceover work for a new character called Spiral in Toy Story 5, and among other new projects that were best described as mystery projects, yet to be announced projects, right? And again, we know that Bob Iger is trying to do whatever it takes to make himself seem like a competent CEO, when in reality, let's be real, guys, he's a very incompetent CEO. He really just wants nothing to do with the core customer base or the shareholders. He doesn't want to respect them. He will lie to them time and time again until he just strings them along into the following year. It's what he's been doing for years now. And I think it was the biggest mistake of all to really make it seem like Bob Iger was out for a while to the general public when Chapek was in, because bringing Bob Iger back into the equation, people lost a lot of faith. People lost a lot of trust in Disney at that point of the shenanigans of switching CEOs twice. But interestingly enough, yet again, here we are. We're approaching, the Snow White box office numbers and the metrics to come in. It's going to be interesting to see how this compares to The Little Mermaid back in 2023, and among other films like The Marvels, for example, back in 2024. Or 23, I should say. But interestingly, we know that there's a lot of things going on here with Snow White. We know that there's a lot of things going on with this movie in general, not just because of the drama between both Rachel and Gal, but also all of the issues, such as how Rachel was very difficult to work with under Mark Webb, and how he was really struggling with her. There's a lot to discuss there, so stay tuned on that in the coming days. But overall, I would like to hear what everyone has to say about Bob Iger's actions below in the comments. Do you think that this is a good move by Iger or a bad move? I think it's obviously just nothing more than a scapegoat by Bob Iger. But if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.